Now we are going from ice cream to pay attention to one of the most pressing topics that we can find in Europe when it comes to policy. Can regulation keep up with innovation? That is a big topic, and we're going to now dive deeply into it. The moderator for the session is Anna Gressel, a partner at Paul Weiss, recognized as one of the top 20 lawyers on a global scale working on AI. And she also co-hosts an acclaimed podcast, Waking Up with AI. And she's going to now have a conversation on stage with Bettina Laugwitz, the director and global leads of AI ethics at SAP Germany, and Christian Darkin, head of creative artificial intelligence at Deep Fusion Films UK. Please give them all a warm welcome. Great job.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am a lawyer, although I do host a podcast, and one of the most pressing topics that we're dealing with today is the right approach to AI regulation. This is particularly important as countries across the globe are taking wildly divergent approaches to regulating and managing risk around AI, and we're so lucky to be joined by two panelists who are leaders in responsible AI and leaders in thinking about AI regulation and the right approach to AI regulation for Europe going forward. So with that, I want to turn it over to my panelists to talk a little bit about where they started in this and where things are going. It's just such a pressing and interesting topic. So we are joined here by Bettina Laugwitz, the Director and Global Lead of AI Ethics for SAP in Germany, and Christian Darkin, the Head of Creative Artificial Intelligence for Deep Fusion Films in the UK. And I want to start by kicking it over first to Bettina to talk about SAP's journey. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, and so have I, before even the age of AI regulations was on the horizon, before there were specific AI regulations at all, or even anyone was talking about it. And that was a different moment. You and I were in this space at that time. So tell us a little bit, how has SAP designed its responsible AI approach? And then how did that actually change once Europe started to move forward with the AI Act, which is really the pillar, the cornerstone of regulating AI in Europe?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, for the opportunity to share how we approach responsible AI and AI ethics and the regulatory part of AI. Roughly 10 years ago, when SAP started to productize machine learning systems, colleagues already started to think about how to do that in a responsible way and how to create trustworthy AI. And in 2016, the European Commission started a high-level expert group on the guidelines for trustworthy AI. Those guidelines have been published in 2018. And colleagues of SAP from SAP side were involved there as well. And we defined guidelines for or principles for ethical AI for SAP and in 2018 as well, and committed to those because back then it was still this topic of responsible AI and trustworthy AI was still evolving and starting. So meanwhile, there are a lot of frameworks available from other companies, of course, but also OECD, for example, or UNESCO, or IEEE, many sets of guiding principles and guidelines for trustworthy AI. But in 2018, we were one of the first companies that did this kind of commitment. And ever since, we've been evolving our approach to AI ethics governance, for example. Yeah, so including, we have an internal AI ethics steering committee that is in charge of deciding about high-risk use cases. Will they be shipped or not? We have an AI ethics office on the operational side of things. Yeah, and then last year we moved from the commitment of our own guiding principles to commitment to the principles for the ethics of AI by OECD, which is just another emphasis of we really want to do the right thing, and not just what we think is right, but adhering to a global standard. And did I said OECD? It's UNESCO basically. Now there are many frameworks available. They include basically the same principles. And if you look into the guidelines, the high-level expert group guidelines for trustworthy AI, and what is defined in there as requirements towards trustworthy AI, you will find a lot of that in the EU AI Act. Yeah, so there is a straight path from the work back then into the regulation. And so as we've been looking into that and following that and monitoring that over the last couple of years, whatever is in the EU AI Act, basically in terms of ethical AI requirements, you'll find that already in our AI ethics policy. So from that perspective, we were monitoring, we were using what we knew was coming or was happening in Brussels, but also in other parts of the world. So we didn't have to adjust to a large extent, because we already are prepared for that based on this ethical AI approach.
I think that's such a good point. And we were involved in some of those efforts back in 2017, 2018, 2019. It was so interesting to see the companies that were ahead and really thinking and kind of taking a very decisive approach to what AI ethics should look like, informing then the regulatory debate. And I think that's very accurate, that many of the regulations were crafted with best practices in mind. And we see that now with the AI Act. Even many of the major companies, major tech companies, are involved in the code of practice negotiations, which is going to define for generative AI many of the most important generative AI obligations and expectations. And so that is a joint industry effort that is informing then the regulatory obligations that come into play. So for companies in the audience that are thinking, how can I lead on regulation? It's often by engaging with regulators really productively. But I want to turn, this was a debate that was happening for a long time. It still is continuing, but I want to turn to Christian, because in the US at least, one of the most important and hotly debated issues is around creative industries and how creative industries should be regulated. I'll just point to two areas of significant debate in the US, and then I want to turn it over. One is intellectual property rights. So how should, for example, AI training data be treated, and should artists be compensated for the use of their data for AI training? The other one is on digital replicas. So what if someone's voice is used and someone's likeness is used by AI to create, a digital version of themselves? Should that be compensated? Should there be controls around that? And we just saw a complaint filed, I think it might have been a day or two ago, I don't know if you saw this, about the use of someone's voice for Darth Vader, to create the voice of Darth Vader without, arguably without having followed many of the industry negotiated rules around that. So Christian, you're right at the front lines of this. And how have you guys thought about crafting your own approach and the market advantages that might create for you?
Well, the people working in TV and film tend to be a little bit dramatic. And so therefore, when kind of generative AI first started coming along, the response of the industry was kind of halfway between, half the people were absolutely panicking, and the other half were absolutely salivating with excitement. And that's pretty much continued. That's pretty much how the industry's dealing with it. And so at that point, a couple of years ago, a group of us got together. My background's in visual effects. A group of us got together and decided to form Deep Fusion, and with the idea that we could navigate the kind of complexities of that transition to AI used in films and used in TV, and work out, along with everybody else, how it was going to work. So your question was about digital deepfakes as being one of the things. Now, we've done a little bit of that. You might have seen yesterday evening we did an interview where the interviewer, live on the stage, where the interviewer was a British TV presenter called Michael Parkinson, who's been dead for a year, but we brought him back for these interviews. Now, we only would do that because it was the guy's son, who was also his producer for 30 years, who asked us to do it. So this is someone with intimate knowledge of exactly what that person would have wanted. It's something, you know, that they talked about before he died. It's you know, it's with the full, and it's really important, I think, that whatever you're doing when you're using AI to replicate something human, is that you make sure that everybody knows that that's what you're doing, but also that you make sure that anyone who's got skin in the game, anyone who's part of the part of the estate, or whose permission is required, you definitely need to make sure they're completely on board, because otherwise, you know, you can risk some really bad things happening. It's not a good place to be.
So I want to talk a little bit about this question of how Europe should regulate AI. And in the US, we've seen, to a certain extent, some pulling back from our regulatory approach. I think we've had a change in administration and different views on how to push innovation forward and what the cost of regulation might look like. And we've actually had some companies, some from the US, some global, say, we don't really want to release our models in the EU market because of potential regulatory backlash on that. But at the same time, the EU has been out ahead for a long time on regulating AI, and the approach here is quite defined, and it's informed this whole global set of regulatory proposals. And I would say we particularly see that actually right now in South America, that is taking many of the ideas from regulating AI from Europe and baking it into their regulation. So how are you guys navigating this kind of question of, are we going to fracture globally on AI regulation, or are we really going to continue to see this Brussels effect that we've seen over the past few years in defining this approach to AI regulation across the board globally?
I think that nothing Europe does or says at this point is going to slow down the development of the big AI companies. So OpenAI and Meta and all those companies and companies in China, they're going to go ahead whatever happens, and we're going to see development at exactly the speed. We can't slow it down. All we can do by legislating is make sure it doesn't happen here, which is not necessarily a good thing. But that's only as regards to the big companies, and the big companies are the drivers, I think, behind developments, behind the new ideas. And just yesterday, I think, Google announced that its new video creation tool, VO3, I think, is not going to be available in Europe. It's going to be available only in America. And I'd love to get my hands on that tool, but I'm not going to be able to. And so that's a concrete example of how our regulation possibly, I don't know that that's the reason why they've decided not to do it, but I'm guessing that regulation is part of the reason why we're not getting that technology. But there was a guy up here just about half an hour ago from Mozilla, and that's open source. And whilst the big companies are the drivers for the big ideas and the big the high cost stuff, open source technology, when people release their software for free, develop it for free, or just give it away, well, that is much more useful to me as someone who's using it because the big companies, say the Google's video production tools, they're going to be very good but quite static. Whereas 3 months behind, there's going to be open source stuff, which is going to be just as good or almost as good, and at the same time 100,000 people all around the world just for fun are tinkering with it and bringing in much more interesting kind of, giving you much more control. and that's what you really want. So I think that open source is what drives the deployment into the turning into an actual product of the ideas that come out of the big companies. And open source is not so regulated in the EU. That's not to say it's not just as dangerous, but it's not as regulated here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good point, and it's a good reminder that the EU AI Act is really risk-based, and it says we want to actually promote open source and an open source ecosystem, and so it actually has, in some respects, cleared a path for open source to be released and to continue to be released, because it does benefit small enterprises so much, and it is something that many folks can build on, and including large companies that are major users of open source in certain contexts. So, we advise all different kinds of companies, and we see a lot of open source uptake these days just because of these issues. But I want to turn to Bettina, because SAP does have really an enterprise customer base and is so sophisticated on these issues. Have you seen a Brussels effect in terms of how you're approaching AI, or in terms of even this question of regulatory slowdown, or is that a red herring and not actually something that is realized in practice?
Yeah, very, very good point. And one comment on what you were saying, Christian. So there is regulation in Europe. And there are two sides to that, right? So the one side is are we blocking innovation? Are we blocking the further development? At the same time, EU AI Act is also it's focusing on the safety, yeah. And you're saying it's risk-based, and that's our approach, our AI ethics approach is also looking at use cases and at the risk or the potential harm this use case can create. It's not about technology, it's not about excluding anything or prohibiting any kind of technology, but in the end, the output, the result must be, or the persons must be safe. And from that perspective, my personal perspective also on this regulation, in a panel earlier here on this stage, there was the notion of tracking regulation and making sure that we follow the regulation is like a puzzle piece with moving parts. If you look at all the puzzle pieces that are happening, then of course it will be very stressful. If you look at the bigger picture, then and not just what is the regulation that is happening and what is the regulation that is upcoming, but take a step back and look at what are the risks that we want to avoid, what are the qualities that we want to have in our AI systems, like for example with AI ethics or responsible AI requirements, then you are in much better shape to create systems that are not just legal and working today, but also in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, because then your expectation or your ambition is much broader. And that is also something that I hear from our customers from all over the world. Yeah? So this notion of European-based company and regulation and GDPR and now EU AI Act. Of course, this causes insecurity to some extent, because it's at the moment not 100% clear. What does this mean for us? What does this mean for our customers and our different roles? At the same time, it is seen as some kind of certificate for quality and for safety. Yeah? So this made in Europe is also perceived as a quality aspect that is appreciated also in other parts of the world that have less rigorous or clear regulation in place.
That's such a good point. It reminds me that one of the pieces of the AI Act that is still going, it's still in progress, is the creation of certification marks. And this idea of a trusted certificate of, something that's either made in the EU and complies with the AI Act or made elsewhere and complies with the AI Act is actually potentially a currency that many companies can work with going forward in creating trust, in actually getting their products to market in an effective and really established kind of secure way. And so It's interesting. We look at regulation now, but the effects are going to take some time to realize. And part of that is because the EU AI Act has this staged approach to implementation. Christian, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say something quite controversial, possibly.
Go ahead.
I think we're regulating for a gap, a short gap. I think our regulation will not stand for forever, because at some point AI is going to get so powerful that it's using its own ethical standards that we can neither control, police, or even probably understand. The gap that we have before that happens is a short and dangerous one, in which AI is both powerful enough to create biological weapons, to break into the Pentagon, to steal all our credit card details, but not powerful enough to say no to us when humans tell it to do that stuff.
Right, exactly. I mean, so much of regulation is about regulating the predictable uses of AI, but some regulation is about regulating misuse, and that is what so many governments are working worldwide to do, to make sure that AI stays in the hands of companies that have those kinds of ethical standards and doesn't get into the hands of individual actors or foreign adversaries that might deploy it in a dangerous way. But this was a fascinating discussion. I'm so glad that you joined us here. I'm glad that our audience had a chance to hear from you. And we look forward to continuing the conversation on this very, very important topic.
Thank you.
Huge round of applause for Anna Gressel, Bettina, and Mark. Thank you so much for hosting this wonderful session, for taking us through this wonderful topic on how we're really taking AI forward.